is as far along the island as we're going to go today. And the main reason... 1822 and 1833, when this was a settlement for secondary offenders. That means that if you were transported out from Britain, of those were convicts, 95 military, wives, civilians, and all vegetation. Soon after they did that, the nor'westerly gales hurtled down the harbour and they nearly blew themselves all the way back to Hobart. They then were put to work building windbreak fences right along the entire length of the island, up to 12 metres in height to withstand those enormous winter gales. And in the shelter of those fences, from here to the far end of the island, they planted vegetable gardens in order to keep the island in supply of food. These buildings that would have been behind me here were also timber buildings. It was fondly known as Government House, and this is where the people in charge resided: the commandant, doctor, military officer and chaplain. Each building would have had 2 rooms with a bedroom at the back, a front room at the front, and then a veranda connecting them all along the front there with the beautiful view. And those are the ships left its moorings out here during a storm. The commandant took his own boat to go and rescue the vessel, but his boat overturned, flinging him and the crew into the water, and they're madly waving to shore for help. And all the convicts waved back. Got it in the end. Where we're standing would have been private vegetable gardens. We're growing things like cabbages, potatoes, turnips, red beetroot, gooseberries, raspberries, thyme, balm. But in the back, you've got 2 piles of bricks indicating other servant quarters and kitchens. 15th century microwave oven. And originally the workstation to the cooks who worked for the commandant and doctor. We do know something of one of the cooks. Her name is Sarah Simmons. Yes, she's a woman. Of the 8 women that were sent out here, most of them were the wives of the... Sorry, of the women that were sent out here, most of them were wives and civilians. Mills there in order to burn that limestone into a crumbly lime. They then add water to it to slake it into a lime slurry, and they placed it in the pit for storage, but they used it for fertiliser for the gardens, but also for waste disposal. You see, the long drop toilets are over cliff face on the other side of the island, and that's where the wind direction comes from. Now, if you take that lime slurry and mix it with sand, you're going to end up with mortar used in these brickwork structures here. The bricks are made locally, not here on Sarah Island, but about 2 kilometres across the water in that source on Sarah Island. So they had a creek over on the mainland dammed up to create a reservoir, which is still there to this day. And they would have brought all the water over by the barrel load, which is quite a lot of water when you consider over 500 people on the island. This is one of the few brick structures on the island. Of the 36 buildings, most of them were timber, and they of course rotted away. But this one is still standing because of the thickness of the walls. Look at that, 1/2 metre of steel. The first one built of this style anywhere in the British colony at this time. There are sandstone steps leading up to the only entrance. The front third of the building is open. Down that way, they didn't bother using it. Only 1 cell on average 2 days a week. Along the back there was another building, and that was the tannery. I've been told that tanning leather is one of the smelliest jobs. You can imagine the combination of smells, can't you? Small bunkhouse for the bakers, large preparation room, and a Suffolk parish oven. Have a look at the mouth of the oven. Can you see the bricks above it are in a vertical position? The whole domed roof of the oven. You can then place the vertical bricks in the centre, slightly shaved on one corner, and you start creating the spiral roof pattern. And when it's complete, you dig out all the sand and the whole structure locks into position with a slight tilt, which is very important because there's no chimney. The wall you can see at the back there indicates there's a 2nd storey. They stack. Let's keep going. Leading up to its start around 1826. There are 3 things that occurred in that year. Second was a massive storm which blew up from the southwest. Now that's really unusual. Don't get storms that big along there. They washed along the other side of the island, and it washed away all the docks, roadways, wharves and jetties. Every major structure is still standing on the island, including this sandstone building. Carved, false Doric columns carved into the sandstone on either top side of the main doorway. Above the doorway and on all the walls on the outside were massive semicircular sandstone blocks with the British coat of arms carved intricately into that. But it was never used as such. It was only ever referred to in the records as the penitentiary. Don't think of it as a jail, it is a dormitory. They decide this is it, we're going for it. They push the raft out to the water. The 9 of them pile onto the raft, and guess what happens? Devonshire back in England until he was transported for embezzlement and desertion, and he was ended up here. If our George Rex was also an illegitimate son, Lacey and his mates have symbolically murdered the great tyrant King George IV. Now, he's been working there. What on earth is David Hoy doing here on Sarah Island? Well, that is your seventh and final puzzle. There we go. Now, Lacey, watch yourself. I don't think Brady's quite forgiving you. That's where George Rex was murdered by George Lacey, but he wasn't buried out there, nor was he buried here on Sarah Island. But halfway through that 12-year period, you've got here to keep an eye on it. You've got a solitary confinement jail, elaborately built, but they rarely ever used it. And finally, you've got this industrial shipyard where we're standing, building good ships and boats under the guidance of a master shipwright, David Hoy. Okay? Now, the shipyard where we're standing is where they built 131 vessels over the 12 years. You have to remember most of them were flat-bottom workboats, about 15 feet in length. Built up on shore just behind you, they were slid sideways down into deep water via the small boats master that you're on today. Yeah, massive. Now, these larger vessels were built behind me on shore, keel, hull and decks completed. Would have been fitted into the keel run, and then the hulls would have been supported by slider rails attached to these double platforms to help launch them stern first or backwards off the large boat's lift. Each of these platforms is made of 3 blue gum timber that Dr. Daniels has been manipulating the ration system in order to gain extra bread. Not that he's actually using the extra bread at the hospital, he's taking it home to Mrs. Daniels. What are you doing with all the extra bread, Mrs. Daniels? Feeding it to your... Is that what you call your chickens? She feeds it to the chickens because the doctor tells her it's scrapped, but it's not. It's embezzled rations. That's a serious Thomas Lamprier. On March 30th, 1829. On March 31st, Lamprier has to close the books for the quarter or this place is going to shut down. The only way he can do that is to inform the commandant. Goat. Oh. And it was witnessed by 4 convicts who just happened to be wandering past at the time. Isn't that right, Mr. Bell?